Hello, dear listeners, and welcome once again to the Jewish Homesteading Project, your source for staying on the derech while going off the grid. Today's episode will be a podcast episode titled, Are You Ready for War? Part 2. We did a Part 1 earlier, talking about different things that you could do to be more prepared in the event of a natural or man-made disaster, and we're going to continue that show today. I'd also like to bring your attention to the fact that we have a new website, jewishhomesteadingproject.com. We have their RSS feed, we have links to some of our socials, and we're going to have more things coming up. We also are going to have a resources page there, and if you have a resource which is, let's say, someone else Jewish who's making a homestead, someone's blog, someone's whatever, I'd like to link to as many people as possible to help grow our community and everyone else's community and give people a place they can get in touch with all these other things. I know it's an old internet concept to have links on your page, but, that's just the way things work best sometimes. Sometimes the Jews are a little behind the technological curve. Okay, we discussed last episode about different things that you could do to get ready for. We talked about the government war advice, the situation at the border in general, and what's going on sort of over there, so people understood in Israel in particular what the problems are. And then we talked about other possible emergencies that you could have, things like weather-based emergencies or, other man-made emergencies. We also spoke about a go bag and what a go bag is and what we might put in it. And now we're going through some of the basic tenets of survival. These are things that you'll need if you're going to survive anywhere. You use them every day in your home, like you drink water that comes out of your sink, right? You use the bathroom in a way that you can get rid of your waste and you're not sickened by it. You use energy when you turn on and off your light switch. So those same things that we use every day in our life, we're going through them one at a time to sort of figure out how we would do that in an emergency scenario. We mentioned before water, food, and energy. So if you're interested in hearing about those, please go back to the previous episode. But now we're going to start off this episode talking about communication. Communication is incredibly vital. There's communication every day going on between you, between people who you meet, between people who you don't even speak to, who just have nonverbal communication. Certain cues that we do in life, let's say a turn signal on a car, or directions we look with our eyes to know that whoever we're passing someone in a supermarket or something like that. All these sort of things fall into communication, but particularly in this instance, I'm going to be discussing communication in an emergency in times of need. So for a lot of people, one of their main systems of communication nowadays is a cell phone. They have a phone. If they need somebody, they call them. Well, in an emergency, that's not always going to work. Now, there'll be everybody trying to call everybody, and that's one of the reasons that it may not work. There have been many emergency situations where everyone pulled out their phone, they called as soon as they can to tell their parents, to tell whoever it was, to try to find the other people they were at the place with so they can get everybody home safely, and the call won't go through. There's not enough power in the systems, not enough bandwidth just to get all those calls done. So if you're in an emergency situation and you're trying to make a phone call, consider sending a text instead. It might take longer to go through. It might be a while before it goes through, but the text will eventually go through once you get to some sort of reception. For instance, God forbid in the situation where someone's being abducted or kidnapped, if they can send a message about it, okay, you're calling, the call's not going through, you're in the woods or you're somewhere where you don't have service. Okay, well, if you send that text, as soon as that phone can get back into reception, and providing that it's on and working, it will send that text. Same thing with these sort of situations. If you're in a power outage situation where your phone has power because you're prepared and you have your phone charger, but the tower doesn't have any power, there's no way for it to jump, the generators are blown on it or something. If you send that text, as soon as that power is restored, those texts will start coming through. Also, try not to spam too much unnecessary information. Try to get the point across. When you're writing a text, it's supposed to be succinct and a little shorter. So think about that too. If you send 20 texts and only half of them get through or something, your point may not get across. So try to make your point in the beginning, like, hey, we're at the house, there's no power, we had to leave the house, we had to go to this place. Try to get that out, those important information bits, in the first message, and then elaborate later on what happened. As far as keeping emergency contacts. So nowadays, people don't remember phone numbers like they used to, but back in the day, everybody had every phone number memorized with their friends, at least if you called them frequently enough, you did. So think about keeping emergency contacts either in your phone case, maybe on a little piece of paper, or somewhere near that, just a list of contacts. I actually have a list in my wallet that has a bunch of different contacts, and I have everyone's initials there. So you may not want to put write mom or dad or something like that. Okay, fine, but I have, people initialed in different ways to show who is who and what's what. That way, if something happens and my phone's broken, let's say I'm at an event and I go to the Siyam Shas and something happens, my phone gets dropped and it breaks. Well, there's a lot of people there. I could just borrow a phone from anyone, but they don't know the number of the person who I'm there with to help find them so we can get back together and leave in the same carpool that we came in. So if you need to have those contacts on you in some manner, like I say, either attached to your phone or maybe in your wallet or something like that. Of course, there are other emergency contacts that you need to know about. Everybody knows their emergency dialing number, whether it's Israel, it's 100, or 911 in America, or any of the other variants they have in other countries. Everyone should always know your emergency numbers. That includes your Hatzalah number. If you have a Hatzalah number, I know the cereal boxes in Brooklyn are good about this, and a lot of the other magnets that people get for their fridge and stuff, but make sure that your Hatzalah number is on that list of contacts too, because that could be very helpful. The other ambulances, as we know, being from people, can take much longer at Hatzalah. Normally they can get someone right away if they're able to. Of course, you could look into radios. Radio is another alternative form of communication. So let's say you're not able to use a cell phone for whatever reason because you ran away into the woods or because you're on some sort of boating trip and you're out in the water or whatever. Having a radio is a good idea. You can buy little radios like you could see in Walmart with just a couple different channels, and then you could have one and somebody else could have one. Normally those radios aren't secured. So just say you have to keep in mind that other people might be able to listen to those radio signals unless you have a radio that has some sort of encryption system or some sort of scrambler or something you might be listened in on. So don't say anything that's too sensitive on the calls with things like that. Of course, there are ham and CB radios. Ham radios, at least in the United States of America, have to have a license to broadcast on. Now, if it's a legitimate emergency, all the other radio guys will forgive you. I don't think the FCC is going to come to you after you were, found someone who was kidnapped and the only way you could get in touch with anyone was with a ham radio. I think they'll forgive you. But in general, if you want to get into ham radio, it's something to look up. I'm not into ham radio, but it's a huge community. There's a lot of different resources online that you can use to learn about it. You can even check out a book at the library about ham radio too, and you can get licensed and have your own call sign or handle or whatever it is, and you can work with that. CB is a little different, civilian band radio, but a lot of the truckers use that. So you could buy a system like that, have a CB radio, or even like a scanner, like a listening system for ham or CB or a police scanner, and then you'd be able to listen to important updates sometimes or hear what other people are talking about. So once again, these are things that are not encrypted. So the same way that you can get a scanner and listen to them, they could listen to you back. I know one story I was told of once where someone was driving and they happened to have a CB in their car, and they listened to some information the truckers were saying on the road on their CBs, and it was very useful information, actually helped them to have a much safer trip in the end of the day. So consider getting a CB radio if that's something you're into. The last form of communication that I'll mention here is communication via leaving some sort of message. So in the event of a catastrophe, let's say there is a bombing, you have to go down to the bomb shelter. You're not in the house, but you had to go to a different bomb shelter because that one that you normally go to was broken or closed or damaged in a storm or an earthquake or whatever reason. So you're going somewhere new, and you know that someone else is going to be coming to the house and they're not going to know where to find you. Leaving a written message is a thing to consider. If you have to change your plans and do something and you need to keep family members in touch, have a place for a written message. You might consider leaving it on the door. You might consider writing it in Hebrew or Yiddish or a language that not necessarily any wandering guy is going to understand over there. Or you could have a dead drop for the message. So for instance, you could say in your family plan, when you make a plan, if there's an emergency and we have to go somewhere and no one's home and we're able to tell you, we're going to leave a message in the mailbox. We're going to tape a piece of paper inside the mailbox, wad it up with the message in it, look there. Or we're going to put it behind the light or above the plant or wherever it is, so that way someone can come, they'll see that there is a message, they can pick it up using a dead drop. And you can do a dead drop for all sorts of things. You could do a dead drop with a bug out bag. Let's say if you have to leave the house and you're not sure if you're ever going to be able to come back, or the house is damaged or something, you could say, okay, well, we have Charlie's bug out bag. Well, Charlie isn't back yet. Okay, well, we're going to leave Charlie's bug out bag in the dead drop. What is that? It could be the shed. It could be anything. But it's as you discuss a family plan, a dead drop is something you might want to consider, especially when you're dealing with adults. With children, it's not always so helpful, but with adults, it could be something to consider. Also, something that could come up with communication is SOS. It's important to know SOS. I would write that on your little contact page. If you don't know it by heart, just learn SOS in case you need to do it with a light or something. A lot of people have done SOS before and shown, that there was an emergency. They're not just a blinking light in the night somewhere on a hillside. It's actually someone in distress who needs help. All right, the next topic is shelter. Now, shelter could be a lot of things. Right now, shelter could be the car that you're driving in, or it could be the home that you live in. But definitely, we all use shelter every day. A shelter could be an emergency shelter, like a bunker, or a safe room, or a underground storage area that you got into to get away from a tornado. So shelter could be many different things. It could be a tent. It could be a bushcraft, wild shelter that you made with an axe in the woods. But shelter is something that you want to consider having also. So in an instance where you're somewhere like Israel, where there's regular rockets going on, obviously the people there are very familiar with emergency shelters, that you might have to move to a shelter, you might have to run to a shelter. It's good to know where shelters are in your area. Think about in your workplace, think about in your, if you're in school or something like that, where that is, and also consider in your home where you would go for shelter from different problems. Sometimes shelter is not the best place to go. In the case of a fire, you might have to leave shelter, but shelter is something you should think about. Now, you can also consider a long-term shelter. Like a long-term shelter might be something like, okay, I'm going to go away to my relatives who live in blah, blah, blah. So if I live in the north of Israel and Hezbollah launched 100 rockets today, and they say it's going to get worse, maybe I should go down to see my relatives in Beersheba, or maybe I should go see my relatives somewhere else. So that's one thing of long-term shelter. Shorter-term shelter, it's nifty to know what hotels are around you. So let's say you have a East Palestine sort of situation. Something is derailed, there's some sort of chemical spill, the air is noxious, or there's a fire, God forbid. Okay, what are you going to do? Well, I don't know. Where are we going to go? Have the number of a couple different hotels around, or maybe write down a couple hotels so you could quickly get to a hotel somewhere you could go to. And remember, in the event, a lot of local hotels are going to book up quickly, so you might want to have one or two of the local ones and some that are a little further away in case you have to go further out. But consider places that you might go in the event of the need to evacuate your shelter. From rain and the elements, if you're outside, if, let's say, you had a situation where you were forced to evacuate, you left your home, now you're outside in the wilderness, consider that exposure is something that's very dangerous. One of the main reasons that we have shelter is to preserve ourselves. The other is to preserve our goods. So, obviously, if your house didn't have a roof, everything would get rained on and ruined. Similarly, if your house didn't have walls, okay, you wouldn't get rained on and ruined, but the cold or the heat would get in and that could hurt you or your things. So consider about when you're making a shelter in somewhere like the woods, you have to make sure that you don't lie on the ground. Why? Because that's going to suck the heat out of your body. That's going to give you hypothermia. It's going to make you very cold. Consider that it might rain wherever you are, so you need to have some sort of way of dealing with the rain. Tents, tarps, all these sorts of things work to that. If it's a situation where it's very cold outside, or your shelter is going to need to have a way to keep you warm. So is that your sleeping bag? Is that a fire? Is that whatever it may be? These are all things that your shelter gives you right now that you don't think about, that you're going to need to take into account when building a shelter. Also, consider one other thing that a shelter does give us is protection from animals and people. So if I have a door and it's locked, someone can't just walk into my house. Well, if I'm sheltering out somewhere else, like in a bomb shelter, a public bomb shelter, or let's say in the wilderness, an animal can just walk up. So a lot of times you need to think about what animals you could have to deal with. Shelter would keep your food away from the bear, or the coyotes or the raccoons or whoever might be out in the forest looking to eat it. Shelter could be a situation where you're in a safe room or, the safest room in your house or, a basement or a cellar, and someone knocks on the door and says, hey, open up, it's the police. Well, okay, that's fine. It might be the police. It also might not. Unfortunately, there were situations in the Gaza Belt area in October where there were people knocked on the door and they would say something like, oh, police, it's okay, you can come out. People went ahead and came out. And unfortunately, it did not all go well for them. So shelter was what was keeping those bad people away from those innocent people. think about your shelter and how it could be compromised. Reinforcing doors is a thing you can do with shelter, even to your regular door in your house. Putting extra kick plate in, putting 4-inch screws instead of the measly 1.5-inch screws that might have come with your door, and even thinking about putting in a bar where you could secure your door. A lot of people will really, really waste time, like criminals will really waste time on a door, when they could easily just throw a brick through your window and dive through. But for some reason, people see the door, they see the portal, and they think, wow, that's the way I have to get in. So if you reinforce your door, you say, oh, I have a window, somebody could just throw a brick through the window. Yeah, but drug addicts don't always think that way. Robbers don't always think that way. If they're low-level guys that don't really take seriously their vocation of stealing or breaking and entering, they might not consider, smashing through a window. Or they might say, well, smashing through a window is going to make a certain amount of noise, and I'm going to have to come through the glass, I might get cut. I'd much rather just give the door one swift kick and be in the room suddenly. You can think about this when police do a raid. When police do a SWAT raid, you don't see them walking over to the windows and jumping through the windows all the time, even though they sure could. They've got the armor, they've got the protection, they could have any tool they wanted. They're coming prepared for their raid. Yeah, but they always focus on the door. It's always the battering ram at the door, right? At least that's what we see anytime on TV or something like that. So realize that the door is where a lot of people are going to attempt to get in, and that's, if you want to reinforce something, that's what you should consider reinforcing. So we mentioned that shelter also protects the integrity of our gear. Consider, too, about keeping your gear in your shelter. Make sure that whatever it is that you have, so if you get a tent, right? Let's say you get a 2-man tent, and you're like, okay, well, it's only me, and it's only my spouse, and we just need a 2-man tent, and it's lightweight, and then we're going to be able to carry it on the trail. Well, how big are your bags? So don't forget, you might have bags, you might have other things you pick up on the way. Consider, maybe you might need more space for certain things, or certain things might be needed to store in a smart way outside of your immediate shelter. Now, clothing is sort of a worn shelter. Clothing is something you have on your body. It's something that protects your skin. It protects you from the elements, different things like that. So don't neglect clothing. If you have an emergency rain poncho, that's a good thing to keep in your car or in your bug-out bag. A lot of people keep an umbrella in their car, something like that. An umbrella, in its own weird way, is a form of shelter. So consider all these things when you're adding shelter into your plans, to have some sort of system that will protect you from other things, even if it's something you're wearing. All right, our next category is sanitation. Now, with sanitation, we need to take into mind mainly one big thing, and that is how we're going to use the restroom. Later, sanitation can also come to keeping your dishes clean, to keeping your clothes clean, keeping your body clean, like taking a shower, but those are a little bit longer term, like a day or two. Short term, your main thing with sanitation is going to be the restroom. If there's a power outage and I have no power, will my toilet still flush? Well, if you have a pressure tank system and you have a well and it's a very small tank, it might only flush 1 or 2 times. If you have a water outage, let's say there's a water main break in the city. Okay, what am I going to do with my toilet now? Oh my gosh, how am I going to use the bathroom? So know that you can pour water into your toilet to make it flush. Either you can fill up the reservoir and then pull the lever if that's something you want to do for kids. Let's say you have a good source of water that you can use as wastewater. So let's say there's a flood or something, but there's an issue with the the water main coming in. So you can easily go outside and take your rainwater or your river water or whatever and fill it in the back of your toilet, so that children, it's easier for them. Someone small or someone, let's say, that's elderly, that can't lift the bucket of water. If it's just for you, you can even pour the bucket directly into the bowl, and that will cause it to start flushing the same way that the water comes into the bowl from the tank on the reservoir of the toilet. The same way, if you pour water in, it'll go right down the toilet. But consider what you might do to dispose of something like that. Let's say you have a shared public shelter. Okay, it's you and it's a couple other apartments, and you're going down to your bomb shelter. Well, is there somewhere to go to the bathroom there? Okay, if there's not, what will you do if someone really needs to go to the bathroom? What if kids are very nervous and that causes them to need to go to the bathroom? Or, you're afraid, or a kid has an accident. Do you have wipes with you? Do you have some clean clothes that you can change into? All these are important when it comes to sanitation. So consider maybe making one of those bucket toilets. And what I mean by bucket toilet is you get a 5-gallon bucket, you get a pool noodle, you cut a slice down the pool noodle, put it on top of the bucket, and you line some sort of cheap garbage bag inside. So, okay, it's no golden throne, but definitely it's a much better alternative than being stuck in a situation where you're down in a bunker, you really need to go to the bathroom, you don't want to leave because there's an ongoing problem, you can't leave because you're afraid there are hostile people outside. Okay, what do you got? Now I have to go to the bathroom. Now what are you going to do? Well, if you have something like this, for about $10, you can have everything you need. And it can all nicely store in the bucket. So you can take your bucket, you can put your pool noodle down in it, and you can put your toilet paper and your wipes on top of that, and then you can put your garbage bags in there. And then as you use it, you'll tie up your garbage bags, put them to the side, and then whenever you're able to come out, obviously you'll dispose of your waste then. Sanitation is also important when making a camp in the woods or something like that. You need to be sure that you dig a latrine. It's actually a mitzvah. And you have to keep your camp a clean place, and consider having a method of digging that. It says in the pasuk that you should carry a spade when they go out to war in Parshas Kitzetzeh. So consider how you would deal with that. What if you would have a digging implement? A lot of hikers carry these little lightweight spades or little lightweight trowels that they can dig a small latrine with, and use it to cover up things. So that's also something you take into consideration in regards to sanitation. And the wipes and the toilet paper, obviously that should go without saying, that you definitely want to keep wipes, you definitely want to keep toilet paper in your car, in your house, in your bug out bag, in your bomb shelter, wherever it is that you might need it. Yeah, a roll of toilet paper inside a plastic bag so it doesn't get wet. That sounds like a great idea in any situation. 2, if your nose runs a lot, if you suffer from allergies, or if you might have a situation where someone has a cold, it's also nice to have some sort of tissues along, or something that can be used as tissues, or even like a reusable handkerchief. But that's also something, if you don't want snot running down your face all day, and you definitely don't want to pick the wrong leaf out of a bush, to try to blow your nose on it or something, consider having that for sanitation as well. Any other needs that you have for sanitation, such as a sponge to shower with, or wipes or something like that. For longer term sanitation, a lot of hikers think about this, about what they're going to need for sanitation. They purchase all those sanitation products, and they have some sort of way of storing them, little Ziploc bags or something, so they don't get wet and ruined. Or if they're something like wipes, they're not going to carry around 3 pounds of baby wipes. They'll have one package, maybe like a little Ziploc bag with that, so it doesn't open and get dried out, or open and get something else wet. So for sanitation, wipes, necessities like a toilet, and other needs like maybe blowing your nose, are things you should all take into account. As far as safety and security are concerned, this is obviously why we're getting ready for something. We have a situation that's not going to be safe for whatever reason, or that we're going to be cut off from different abilities. So safety and security come into this a little bit too. Consider having a cutting implement. A lot of people have times nowadays in our modern society when they need to open something, they need to cut something, or they need to cut a seatbelt out of a car, and they don't carry a pocket knife. Some places it's illegal to carry a pocket knife. I know in Israel there can be circumstances where basically any knife is illegal. In London, almost all knives are illegal as far as I understand. In different states in America, there are different laws about carrying knives. But definitely when it comes to your bug out bag, or it comes to your car, or it comes to your house, you should have a pair of scissors. You should have some sort of cutting implement. I think for a bug out bag, you really need something like a bushcraft knife. Something you could use as a improvised cutting device for even wood or small limbs, or to make a feather stick so you could create fire. But definitely you want to have some sort of cutting implement for safety and security. I do not advise you ever tell anyone that this item is for self-defense. So if you have a dagger that you keep in your bug out bag, a survival dagger or a survival machete or something, the last thing you want to tell someone is for self-defense. When it comes to the court, they always look with a side eye, this sort of snide side eye at you. Oh, you have a knife for self-defense? What are you, some sort of knife murderer? And in some states, particularly saying that, I know New York is one of them. In America, you can particularly be prosecuted if you say the purpose of the blade is for self-defense. Whereas if you say, oh, this is something I use for fishing, or this is something I use when backpacking, or I cut rope with this, or I, practice bushcraft with it, then, oh, you're fine. The second you say it's a self-defense weapon, oh, then it's a deadly weapon, and now you can be charged with possession of a deadly weapon just by in and of itself. So don't do that. If you carry any sort of edged weapon, don't tell anybody it's for self-defense. But know in your heart that, for safety, one of the things you might have to do is defend yourself. So don't tell anybody that's why it's there. Don't use it for that purpose. Exclusively, obviously, you can do many other things with a knife. You can cut up an apple with a knife, or you can also defend yourself with it. But having a cutting implement is very important, especially when it comes to bushcraft survival, things like that. Having a personal weapon of any sort of kind. Obviously, the laws are going to vary wildly between where you are and what you can have, whether you're allowed to purchase a firearm or you're allowed to own a knife for self-defense, or whether you can just have something like a walking cane that sort of doubles quietly as your self-defense item. A lot of guys used to say, oh, well, I have a baseball bat next to my door and I just give somebody a whack. Yeah, well, in New York, if you tell them that baseball bat's for whacking people, it instantly becomes a deadly weapon. So hold on. You may not want to have something that's obviously a weapon as your self-defense or your personal weapon, but it is important to think about if you have to leave your house, if you have to go somewhere, if something's going on and somebody's attacking you, is there a way you can defend yourself? There's a lot of things you can use. You can use almost anything as an improvised weapon, but designating something before can be helpful sometimes when you're training and putting together sort of your regimen of what you would do if you were attacked or you had to try to save someone else. A reflective vest is something that you may not think about in safety and security, but reflective vests are great because let's say you're a Haverim guy. Well, you know that pulling over on the side of the road can be a dangerous situation. All the cops, there's all these cops that have the stop and pull over and you can't be here and you can't be there when the cops pulled over or whatever. Yeah, because it's dangerous. Cars sometimes lose control or somebody's not looking, they slide off the road and they can hit someone who's parked on the shoulder, especially if they're going fast. So consider having a reflective vest or maybe some sort of light system. I know they sell these little flares, electric flares they call them, that you could put on a helmet, or you could use a clip to attach to your clothing. These things are all smart. Gosh, I know that I've been driving plenty of times and I've seen someone walking down the street wearing all black clothes, totally in the dead of night, and I've been like, wow, I barely saw that guy. So consider also, if you're going to be walking somewhere, you think you might need to be walking somewhere, having at least a reflective belt, if not a full reflective vest. Gloves and goggles, very good things to have. In different situations, I can definitely say EMTs and policemen carry plastic gloves. For instance, if they're dealing with someone who's hurt, there's blood everywhere, you don't know what diseases that person might have, or you don't want to, get your hands on all those bodily fluids for obvious reasons. They carry some gloves. Gloves are also important for your medical. If you're going to be treating someone, in your first aid kit, you want to have a few pairs of gloves. But you could also consider other types of gloves, like gloves that help you protect your hands a little bit. So if you're going to be out in the middle of the wilderness and you're going to be doing things, you're going to be chopping wood to make a shelter, well, it's easy to get a splinter or something. Having gloves on could help you with that. So consider a pair of gloves as well. Also consider a coat wherever you're going, whether it's a raincoat or it's a temperature coat. Carry what's seasonably appropriate in your vehicle or your bug out bag, wherever it is, or keep it in your shelter. If you live somewhere it's very cold or you're in the winter, you might want to move some sort of sweater, some sort of coat to your shelter, or so you have that. In regards to goggles, there are times when goggles are very useful, or sunglasses. So that's also good for safety and security. It helps protect your eyes from different things. If you're going to be out in the woods chopping down things for a shelter, it would be nice to have a pair of glasses or goggles or something like that, just to keep little chips or dust or whatever from getting in your eye. So that's another thing you might want to consider in those preparations. Lastly, we're going to get here to medical. Medical obviously is one of those things that's like security. It's not really important until you need it, and then it's super important. So, nobody needs the doctor until they're sick, right? When you're having a great day, Baruch Hashem, you're out there enjoying life, and then everything's fine. I don't need a doctor. And then when you're sick, oh boy, do you need one. So with medical preparation, consider that you need to be prepared for these things, not because they will happen, but because they could happen, and when they do, you'll really need them. A tourniquet is something like that. A tourniquet's a device that stops the blood flow from a limb that's been damaged, or let's say even an artery. Tourniquets you normally only apply to a limb. So let's say God forbid someone's leg was damaged and they're bleeding a lot from their leg. There are instances when you might use a tourniquet. Now obviously it's good to consult with someone who's more of a specialist in the field and to decide when it's appropriate to put on a tourniquet, but knowing the ability to use one is important, and having one is important. Either have a specialized tourniquet or something you can use as a tourniquet. The Israelis would sometimes use in the military these cloths, triangle cloths, that they would just wind up and they put a stick in between them and tighten that off, and that would be the way you could put a tourniquet on. There's also other types of tourniquets the Americans have a nifty little system that you can wrap around your leg or your arm and just twist this little stick, and it does everything for you, clips nicely into place. They're not that expensive on Amazon. It's a good thing to have. Even if you're not going to use it, there might be someone there at the situation that knows how to use it. But it's also a good thing to learn. It's definitely something that, would be important to learn to know to use for yourself, because it could save someone's life. Bandages, obviously. The Israeli field bandage is one of the better bandages. A lot of people really like it. I think it's great. So it's good to have larger bandages like that. Consider getting something like that. And they're pretty simple to operate. You just open the bandage, put the sterile side on directly onto the wound, and then use the different strings or ribbons or whatever that's attached to it to tie it up properly. But bandages are definitely something you want to have wherever that is, in your shelter, in your car, in your bug out bag, in your house. Consider a 30-day supply of your medications. If you or members of your family are on medications, consider having enough in your house. And the Israeli military has said this to people in the country, to consider getting medications. So if there's a shortage or something, you're not cut off, especially if they're life essential medications, something like insulin. Make sure you can have as much as you can store, and consider also ways that you might be able to store it. If you go out, certain insulin needs to be kept cold. Consider that might be something you would need to do something extra for, maybe having a cold bag or a cooler that you could drop a cold pack into. So if you have to, God forbid, leave your house, you can open your one of these little coolers. You could drop in a frozen ice pack and then drop in your insulin with it to keep it cold while you travel to your next place that you're going to. Sterile treatment for wounds, just like with the bandage and with the gloves that we mentioned. You want to have something like that so you can treat things. Alcohol pads, or some sort of disinfectant that you could put on things is a smart thing to have in your medical kit. Also, consider how accessible medical help is going to be in different situations. Medical help, serious medical help, like an operation theater, that may not be something you can get to anytime soon. So when you're planning for something like an emergency, consider your medical help, where that is, how you would get to it in the situation. So if you're in your house and there's an emergency in your house and you have to leave, and on the way out someone sprains their ankle, gets hurt, well, that might be one of these like sort of urgent care facilities, like these side doctor facilities that they have. Whereas that might be available, that might not be available. Sometimes these places can't do a lot for you if there's no power. So if you have a large power outage in the area, they may not be able to do a lot for you. In the event of a war or some sort of other conflict or some sort of mass casualty event, they may not have time for you. So consider that with your medical supplies. One of the reasons that we're making sure we have some amount of medical supplies is because these other medical help facilities might be overwhelmed or unable to assist, or we might be unable to reach them. Don't forget things you regularly use. So if you have other medical things that you would use, let's say you have special cream or something, or a special this or that the other used to treat something, or special vitamins you take, throw those in there too. If you have space for them. Obviously with your bug out bag, carry weight is going to be an issue. So you have to sort of weigh out what you have, make sure that it makes sense. With something like a car, you can keep more things. And you might even have two different bug out bags. You might have a bug out bag that you would carry just on your back if you had to go right now. And you might have a car bag. For instance, you're not going to take a baby stroller with you if you're hiking through the woods. On the other hand, if you can leave with your car, I'll throw the baby stroller in there, of course. So consider in all these things, weight is a factor into this. Make sure that you're packing things correctly and prioritize what's more important over less important. So you don't need 6 cell phone chargers. You need 1. Oh, but there's 6 members of my family and they all have a different phone. Okay, so let's spread this out in an even way, or consider going for a phone charger that has more power capacity or that is lighter. All this is going to come into your thought process as you're working on this stuff. So I hope these have helped you guys out today to finish up our show and thinking about ways that you could be prepared for something. Of course, we always pray that there'll be no necessity for any of this, and that the current wars should end and everyone should be healthy and happy and at peace. We're, of course, thinking of all those who are held captive right now, and all the ways that we could do things in our lives to help them not ever happen again, to help them get out and help that situation not ever happen again. And Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we should be zoiche to the Bias Mashiach, when we won't need to think about these things so much, and if at all, and everything will be much better off with the world being the way that it was meant to be. So thanks again for listening, guys. Of course, you can follow us on our website. You can follow us. We have a Facebook. We have an Instagram. Get in touch with us all those different ways that you'd like to. Hopefully soon we'll have an X account. Once again, our website is the Jewish Homesteading Project. Once again, our website is jewishhomesteadingproject.com. There'll be links to it on this. We're also, of course, on YouTube, and our podcast is coming up there. We're on, I believe, Google Podcast now, too. And if you can't find it on there, let me know. Also, you definitely should be able to find it on Podbean. So thanks so much for listening. Once again, tune in to us here at the Jewish Homesteading Project for ways to stay on the derech while you go off the grid.